A single sentence can be more devastating than a global market crash. For Marcus Thorne, a man who commanded boardrooms and moved billions with a phone call, this was a truth he was about to learn in the most brutal way imaginable. He strode into an exclusive Soho boutique, his mistress on his arm, to celebrate the biggest deal of his career. His target for ridicule. The quiet, pregnant clerk behind the counter. He laughed at her. He patronized her. He had absolutely no idea he was sneering at his own wife, Isabella, in the very empire she had secretly built. This is the story of that shattering sentence, and the moment a titan's world was brought to his knees by the woman he never even saw. Marcus Thorne lived a life measured in zeros. The number of zeros in his net worth, in the value of the mergers he orchestrated in the price tag of the penthouse overlooking Central Park. His world was a symphony of sharp angles and muted colors. The steel and glass of his office at Thorne Capital. The charcoal grey of his Brioni suits, the polished obsidian of his desk. His heart, it seemed, was forged from the same cold, hard material. His wife, Isabella Rossi, was the one splash of vibrant color in his monochrome existence, though he had long since stopped noticing. They had met 6 years ago at a charity gala. He was a rising star in finance, ruthless and ambitious. She was a quiet art history graduate with a warm smile and eyes that held the depth of an old-world painting. She came from a family of Italian artisans, leather workers, whose name Rossi once meant something in the cobbled streets of Florence, but meant little on the roaring floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Marcus had been charmed by her grace, her seeming simplicity. She was a beautiful, elegant accessory who would look good on his arm and run his home with quiet efficiency. He had acquired her much like he acquired art or companies. But acquisitions once settled are often filed away. In the 6th year of their marriage, Isabella felt less like a wife and more like a ghost haunting the opulent halls of their apartment. She was 5 months pregnant with their first child, a fact that should have been a cornerstone of their shared joy. Instead, it was a footnote in Marcus's daily planner. He had been present for the first ultrasound, his eyes more on the stock ticker on his phone than the flickering black-and-white image of his own child. Incredible Izzy. He'd murmured the words automatic hollow. He hadn't been to an appointment since. His current obsession was the Ethelred acquisition, a hostile takeover of a rival tech firm that consumed his every waking thought. His days were a blur of conference calls, aggressive negotiations, and clandestine meetings. His nights were often spent working late. A phrase Isabella had come to understand was a euphemism for time spent with Chloe Sterling. Chloe was everything Isabella was not. She was a marketing executive with sharp blonde hair, a sharper tongue, and an ambition that mirrored Marcus's own. She was his equal in the boardroom, and he believed his plaything outside of it. Their affair was an open secret in their circle, a crack in the pristine facade of the Thorne marriage that everyone could see, but no one dared mention. Isabella knew. Of course she knew. She smelled Chloe's cloying perfume, a specific expensive scent called Scandal on his suits. She saw the late-night texts that were hastily deleted. She felt the cavernous distance that had grown between them in their king-sized bed. The pain had been a sharp physical thing at first. Now it had settled into a dull, permanent ache, a companion to the gentle kicks she felt from within her womb. She could have confronted him. She could have screamed, cried thrown the Lalique crystal vases he so admired. But what would have been the point to fight for a man who didn't see her? To beg for a love that had evaporated? No. Isabella Rossi was descended from creators, from people who built things with their hands and their hearts. Her grandfather, Nonno Antonio, had always told her, "Dignity, Isabella, is not in what you have. It is in what you build. No one can take that from you." And so she had started to build. Months before she had used the inheritance, her grandfather left her a modest sum by Marcus's standards, but a fortune to her to secretly reclaim her family's legacy. She found a small, neglected storefront in Soho, a district known for its chic boutiques and artistic flair. She spent weeks overseeing renovations, her burgeoning belly hidden under loose artists' smocks. She flew to Florence, using her family connections, to source the finest leather silks and cashmere from artisans who still valued craft over mass production. She named it Atelier Rossi. It was her secret, her sanctuary, her rebellion. Her days took on a new rhythm. In the mornings she was Mrs. Thorne, overseeing the staff in the silent penthouse. But in the afternoons she would change into simple, comfortable maternity wear, tie her dark, wavy hair back in a simple bun, and take the subway downtown. No one gave her a second glance. She was just another pregnant woman in the bustling city. At the atelier, she wasn't the wife of a billionaire. She was Isa, the owner, the creative director, the heart and soul of the operation. She worked alongside her small, hand-picked staff, led by her fiercely loyal manager, Sofia Giordano. Sofia was a design school graduate with a punk rock haircut and an unerring eye for style. She was the only one who knew Isabella's full story. "Are you sure about this?" Sofia had asked one afternoon, watching Isabella carefully arranging a display of silk scarves. Her brow furrowed in concentration. "Working the floor yourself? What if someone recognizes you?" Isabella smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that rarely appeared at the penthouse. "Who would recognize me?" "My husband's friends don't shop in Soho, unless it's a globally recognized brand. To them, a new independent store is invisible. And as for Marcus, Sophia, he wouldn't recognize me if I was sitting across from him at dinner." "Here," she said, her voice filled with a quiet pride. "I'm not invisible." She even designed a simple, elegant uniform for the staff, a black tunic-style dress made of a soft, forgiving material that comfortably accommodated her growing bump, paired with a small, discreet golden pin shaped like the Rossi family crest, a needle and thread. It was professional, understated, and made her anonymous. The store had been open for 3 weeks, and it was already creating a buzz. A few fashion bloggers had discovered it, praising its commitment to authentic craftsmanship and its soulful luxury. Sales were modest but steady. For Isabella, every sold item, every appreciative customer was a small victory, a brick in the foundation of her new life. A life she was building for herself and for her child. A life that had nothing to do with the cold, empty world of Marcus Thorne. She was stocking shelves one Tuesday afternoon, humming a soft lullaby her nonna used to sing, when she felt a sharp, joyful kick from the baby. She paused, placing a hand on her belly, a wave of overwhelming love washing over her. "Just you and me, little one," she whispered. "We're going to be all right." She had no idea that her two worlds, so carefully separated, were on a collision course, and that the impact would be more devastating than she could ever have imagined. Marcus Thorne was about to close the biggest deal of his life, and he was in the mood to celebrate. His idea of celebration, however, was about to shatter his carefully constructed universe. The Ethelred deal closed on a Thursday. Marcus felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the primal thrill of victory that was more potent to him than any drug. He had crushed his opposition, absorbed their assets, and added another $1 billion to his firm's valuation. His office was a cacophony of champagne corks, popping and backslapping congratulations. He stood at the panoramic window, a glass of vintage Dom Perignon in hand, and stared down at the city that was his kingdom. "You're a king, Marcus," Chloe Sterling purred, sidling up to him. She ran a perfectly manicured red nail down the lapel of his suit. "And every king needs to properly reward his most valuable advisors." Marcus smiled a predator's smile. The thrill of the deal had left him feeling reckless magnanimous. "Name it, Chloe. Anything you want." Chloe's eyes lit up. "There's this new boutique everyone is talking about. It's supposed to be incredibly exclusive, real Italian craftsmanship. Not like that mass-market Gucci trash. It's called Atelier Rossi. I want a bag. Their signature Fiorenza tote. And maybe a few other things." The name Rossi didn't even register. To Marcus it was as common as Smith or Jones, a meaningless label on a product he was about to purchase. "Fine," he said, draining his glass. "Let's go. My driver is downstairs." He felt a perverse pleasure in the idea of this public excursion. Taking his mistress shopping on the day of his greatest triumph was a display of power. It was a statement. He was Marcus Thorne, and the rules did not apply to him. As the Maybach glided through the streets towards Soho, Marcus was on his phone, barking orders, finalizing post-acquisition details. Chloe was scrolling through her Instagram, preening. The name of the boutique was forgotten as soon as it had been programmed into the GPS. They pulled up to a discreet, elegant storefront. The name Atelier Rossi was written in tasteful gold script above the door. It was understated a far cry from the garish, logo-plastered facades of the global brands Marcus was used to. "This is it?" Marcus asked, a note of disdain in his voice. It looked small. "Don't be a snob, Marcus," Chloe chided, though she secretly shared his sentiment. "Exclusivity is the new luxury." They stepped inside. The air was cool and smelled faintly of expensive leather and lily of the valley. Soft, ambient music played. The space was minimalist, yet warm, with handcrafted wooden displays and soft, flattering lighting. It was, Marcus had to admit, tastefully done. Isabella was at the front counter, discussing a shipment invoice with Sophia. Her back was to the door. She was wearing the simple black uniform tunic, her hair in its usual simple bun. From the back, pregnant and plainly dressed, she was utterly anonymous. "Hello." Chloe's voice cut through the quiet ambiance like a shard of glass. Isabella turned a polite customer service smile already forming on her lips. The smile froze. Her blood ran cold. It was him. Marcus. And clinging to his arm, looking like a vulture in a designer dress, was Chloe Sterling. For a terrifying second, the world tilted on its axis. Her breath hitched. She felt the baby kick as if sensing her distress. Sophia, standing beside her, saw the color drain from Isabella's face and instantly understood. She put a supportive hand on the small of Isabella's back. The small gesture was a lifeline. It grounded her. And then something shifted within Isabella. The shock and fear receded, replaced by a glacial calm. The years of being ignored, of feeling invisible, had in this moment become a strange sort of armor. He didn't see her. He was looking right at her. But his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, slid over her, as if she were part of the furniture. He saw a pregnant shop girl, a nameless, faceless functionary. He did not see his wife. The pain of that realization was so profound, so absolute, that it circled back around to a kind of dark, empowering clarity. Fine. If he wanted a clerk, she would give him the best damn service he'd ever had. "Good afternoon," Isabella said, her voice steady, professional, betraying none of the hurricane raging inside her. "Welcome to Atelier Rossi. How may I help you?" Marcus didn't even look at her directly, already distracted by a display of men's wallets. Chloe, however, sized Isabella up with a contemptuous glance, her eyes lingering on the swell of her belly. "I'm here for the Fiorenza tote," Chloe announced, as if expecting Isabella to be honored by the request. "In black crocodile, of course." "An excellent choice," Isabella replied, her tone even. "It's one of our signature pieces. If you'll follow me." She led them towards the back of the store, where the high-end bags were displayed in glass cases like museum artifacts. She moved with a practiced grace, her steps measured. She could feel Marcus's presence behind her, a suffocating weight. She could smell his cologne, the same scent that lingered on their pillows. She fought the urge to be sick. As she carefully unlocked the case and retrieved the exquisite black crocodile bag, Chloe began her performance. "It must be so difficult," Chloe said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy as she looked pointedly at Isabella's stomach. "Working on your feet all day in your condition. I suppose some people just have to." Isabella placed the bag on the velvet-topped counter. "I enjoy my work," she said simply. Marcus, who had been impatiently checking his watch, chuckled. It was a low, condescending sound. "That's the spirit," he said, still not making eye contact with Isabella, addressing his words more to Chloe. "A good work ethic is important. Nothing comes for free." The hypocrisy was so staggering it was almost comical. Here was a man who had inherited a significant starting capital from his father, speaking of a good work ethic to his own wife, who had built this entire business from scratch while carrying his child. Chloe took the bag, inspecting it. "The quality is acceptable," she conceded. She then turned her attention to a display of cashmere scarves. "I'll take this one too," she said, tossing a deep crimson scarf onto the counter without looking. "Wrap them both. Beautifully." Isabella began to carefully wrap the items in layers of tissue paper, her hands moving with the precision her grandfather had taught her. Every fold was perfect, every crease sharp. It was a small act of defiance, of showing pride in her work, in her heritage. Marcus, growing bored, finally glanced over. His eyes fell on Isabella's hands, then traveled up her arms to her face. For a fleeting moment there was a flicker of something in his expression, a microscopic furrow of his brow. There was something familiar. But the context was all wrong. Isabella, his wife, the woman who wore couture and attended galas, working as a shop assistant. In this drab uniform, pregnant and looking tired. The thought was so absurd, so impossible, that his brain dismissed it instantly. It was just a passing resemblance. He refocused on Chloe, who was now examining a small leather card holder. "Is this real calf skin?" she demanded, her tone accusatory. "It feels a little thin." "It is the finest Tuscan calf skin, madame," Isabella replied, her voice remaining placid. "The tanning process makes it exceptionally supple yet durable." Chloe grunted. "Whatever. Just add it to the pile. Marcus is paying." She smirked at Isabella. "He's very generous." The final transaction was the crucible. Isabella rang up the total. It was just over $25,000. $25,462, Isabella announced. Marcus pulled out his wallet and handed her a black credit card, the Thorn Capital Unlimited card, His name was embossed in silver, Marcus A. Thorne. Isabella took the card. Her fingers brushed his for a fraction of a second. It felt like an electric shock. She slid the card through the machine. Her heart was a jackhammer against her ribs. This was it, the final act. "There's a problem with the card," a small automated voice from the machine chirped. "Please see cashier." An error, a fluke of technology, a moment of cosmic intervention. Marcus sighed, annoyed. "What's wrong?" "Run it again. There's no limit on that card." "It's not the limit, sir," Isabella said, looking at the small screen. "It seems to be a security flag. Sometimes with a new merchant, the bank wants verbal confirmation. Do you have identification to match the name on the card?" It was standard procedure, but in that moment it felt like a trap she was setting. Chloe scoffed loudly. "Are you kidding me? Do you have any idea who this is? He could buy this entire pathetic little shop with the money in his sock. Just run the damn card again." "I cannot, madame," Isabella said, her voice hardening almost imperceptibly. "Store policy requires me to verify the identity if the system flags it. It's for the cardholder's protection." Marcus, his patience finally snapping, fixed her with an icy glare. It was the first time he had truly looked at her, his eyes filled with condescending fury. "Listen to me, sweetheart," he snarled, leaning in close. "I don't have time for this bureaucratic nonsense. You are a clerk. Your job is to do as you're told. Now take my money and give me my things before I have a word with your manager, and make sure you're spending your condition as my friend. So delicately put it in the unemployment line." The threat hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Sophia, who had been watching from afar, took a protective step forward, but Isabella raised a hand, stopping her. She looked directly into her husband's furious, unrecognizing eyes. The glacial calm within her began to crack not with fear, but with a righteous, incandescent rage. She held up the black credit card between her thumb and forefinger. "The name on the card is Thorne," she said, her voice low, clear, and resonant, cutting through the store's quiet music. "Marcus A. Thorne." She paused, letting the name hang in the air. "It's a very strong name." She continued, her gaze unwavering. "I should know. It's my name, too." She gently placed a hand on her pregnant belly. "And it is the name of the child, your child, that I am carrying." She took a small step back from the counter, her eyes never leaving his face. She watched the storm of emotions brew in his eyes, first utter confusion, then a dawning, sickening flicker of recognition. His gaze darted from her face to her pregnant form in the simple black dress, to the small golden pin on her collar, the Rossi family crest he'd seen on her grandfather's old stationery. The pieces began to click into place with the sickening finality of a guillotine. "Isabella." He whispered the name, a ragged, choked sound. The color drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly shade of white. Chloe stared, her jaw slack, her eyes darting between Marcus and the pregnant clerk. "Isabella, his wife, no. That's impossible." Isabella turned her head slowly, fixing Chloe with a look of pure, unadulterated steel. "Get out of my store," she said. It wasn't a request. It was a command delivered with the absolute authority of a queen reclaiming her throne. Then she turned back to her husband, the man who was now looking at her as if he had truly seen her for the first time. "And as for the manager you wanted to speak to," Isabella said, a bitter, triumphant smile touching her lips. "You're looking at her. I own this place, Marcus. Every last brick, every last thread. Welcome to Atelier Rossi." The silence that descended upon Atelier Rossi was absolute. It was heavier than the crocodile leather, more fragile than the Murano glass on the shelves. It was the sound of a world breaking. Marcus Thorne stood frozen, his mind a maelstrom of denial and dawning horror. The face he was looking at was undeniably Isabella's, but it was a version of her he hadn't seen in years. The quiet deference was gone, replaced by a formidable strength. The polite, vacant smile she wore at his corporate dinners was gone, replaced by a look of profound, righteous anger. The woman in the simple black tunic was not the ghost who haunted his penthouse. She was a stranger, and yet more his wife than the woman he had left that morning. Isabella, he stammered again, his voice barely audible. What is this, a joke? Do I look like I'm joking, Marcus? Her voice was devoid of emotion, which was somehow more terrifying than if she had been screaming. Chloe, recovering from her initial shock, let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. This is insane. Marcus, she's lying. This is some kind of setup. She turned on Isabella. How dare you impersonating Mrs. Thorne? I'll have you arrested for fraud. Sophia, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. Her loyalty to Isabella was a tangible force. The only fraud here is you, lady, she said, her voice laced with the grit of her Brooklyn upbringing. I've been working with Mrs. Thorne for 6 months, watching her build this place with her own 2 hands while he... She jerked her chin at Marcus. Was probably whining and dining you. Chloe paled, realizing she was outmatched. She looked at Marcus for support, but he was still staring at Isabella, his expression one of utter devastation. He looked like a man who had just watched his own reflection shatter. Get out, Isabella repeated to Chloe, her voice like ice. This time there was no arguing. Chloe, humiliated and suddenly aware of her precarious position, grabbed the shopping bags off the counter, the unpaid-for merchandise, and fled the store, the bell on the door chiming her ignominious exit. She didn't look back. Now they were alone. Marcus and Isabella with Sophia standing as a silent witness. The space between them at the counter felt like a chasm. Isabella, I don't understand. Marcus began, his voice weak. Why all this? A store working like this? He gestured around vaguely, as if the concept of honest work was a foreign language. A dry, mirthless laugh escaped Isabella's lips. Why you're asking me why? Because I had to. Marcus. Because I was disappearing. I was a name on a joint bank account, a hostess for your parties, a placeholder in your bed. I needed something that was mine, something you couldn't acquire or merge or discard. She rested a hand on her belly again. I'm building a life, Marcus, a real one, for me and for this baby, a life with value that isn't measured in dollars. I didn't know, he floundered. You never said anything. Said anything. She shot back, her voice finally cracking with the raw pain she had held back for so long. When would I have said anything? Marcus, in the 2 minutes you spared me between your phone calls over breakfast while you read the Wall Street Journal. Or should I have booked an appointment with your secretary? I tried to talk to you for years. But you can't talk to a man who isn't there. Every word was a perfectly aimed blow, striking at the hollow core of his neglect. He had no defense. He knew she was right. He had been absent in every way that mattered. And today, she continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Today, you didn't just ignore me. You looked right through me. You stood there with that woman, and you laughed. You laughed at me, at your wife, at the mother of your unborn child. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and furious. Do you have any idea what that feels like, to be so utterly worthless to the one person who promised to value you above all others? He flinched as if she had physically struck him. No, Izzy, I swear to you I didn't recognize you. That's the point, Marcus, she cried, the tears finally spilling over, tracing paths down her cheeks. That's the entire god-awful point you should have. If you had truly looked at me once in the last year, you would have known. But you didn't. You saw a pregnant clerk, and your brain categorized her as unimportant. And you moved on. He opened his mouth to speak, to apologize, to explain, but no words came. What could he say? Sorry for the oversight. My mistake. The inadequacy of any apology was staggering. Sophia gently touched Isabella's arm. Isa, maybe you should sit down. Isabella shook her head, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. She looked at Marcus, her expression hardening again into a mask of resolve. I want you to leave, Marcus. Leave my store. Leave my key on the table at the penthouse. I'll have the rest of your things sent to your office. The finality of her words hit him like a physical blow. What Isabella know? We can talk about this. We can fix this. Fix this. She let out a short, bitter laugh. Some things can't be fixed, Marcus. They can only be ended. You broke this. You shattered it. And I'm done trying to glue the pieces back together. She turned her back on him, a gesture of ultimate dismissal, and began to calmly rearrange a display of gloves, her hands trembling slightly. Sophia will see you out. Marcus stood there for another long moment, his world imploding in slow motion. The victory of the Ethelred deal felt like ashes in his mouth. The king was standing in the middle of his kingdom, and he had just discovered it was built on sand. He looked at the proud, straight back of his wife, a woman he suddenly realized he didn't know at all, and a feeling of loss, so profound it stole his breath, washed over him. He turned and walked out of the store, not with the swagger of Marcus Thorne, titan of industry, but with the shuffling, defeated gait of a man who had just lost everything that ever mattered. The bell on the door chimed his departure, a lonely, mournful sound. He went home. The penthouse felt cavernously empty, the silence deafening. Her scent was everywhere. He walked into their bedroom and saw it as if for the first time. On her nightstand was not the latest celebrity gossip magazine, but a stack of books. What to expect when you're expecting the happiest baby on the block. Building a business from the ground up. Dog-eared pages and highlighted passages marked her journey, a journey she had taken entirely on her own. He saw the key on the polished mahogany table in the foyer, exactly where she said it would be. A single brass key. It looked small and insignificant, but it was the key to his home, to his life. And she had given it up without a second thought. That night, for the first time in his adult life, Marcus Thorne cried. He didn't cry for the loss of his wife, the accessory. He cried for the loss of Isabella, the person, the woman who built a business while carrying his child, who stood up to his mistress, who looked him in the eye and dismantled his entire existence with a few quiet words. The next day, two things happened. First, a formal letter from a law firm, Davies, Goldberg and Associates, arrived at his office, informing him that their client, Mrs. Isabella Thorne, was initiating divorce proceedings. The second was a phone call. The Ethelred deal, his crowning achievement, was in jeopardy. a regulatory commission tipped off by an anonymous source about certain aggressive tactics used during the takeover, had launched a full-scale investigation. All assets were frozen. The deal was dead in the water. He learned later that the anonymous tip had come from a disposable phone, its data trail leading back to a coffee shop across the street from the offices of Chloe Sterling's marketing firm. Chloe, scorned and vengeful, had torched his kingdom on her way out. Marcus Thorne was at rock bottom. He had lost his wife, his child, and his Umrah in the space of 24 hours. Stripped of his wealth and his power, he was forced for the first time to look at the one thing he had spent his entire life avoiding himself, and he did not like what he saw. The weeks that followed, Marcus Thorne's public humiliation and private ruin were a desolate education in gravity. He learned that the higher one climbs, the more shattering the fall. His name, once a key that unlocked any door on Wall Street, was now a liability. The Ethelred deal, which was to have been his magnum opus, had become his epitaph, collapsing under the weight of a regulatory investigation, fueled by Chloe Sterling's vengeful anonymous tip. The investigation was a public vivisection of his business practices, laying bare the ruthlessness that had once been celebrated as genius and was now condemned as predatory. His days became a humiliating procession through the sterile wood-paneled conference rooms of his lawyers. Men who had once courted his business now spoke to him in carefully modulated, pitying tones, discussing liquidation strategies and reputational damage control. He was forced to sell his assets, not in a powerful display of market timing, but in a desperate bid to stay solvent. The Patek Philippe watch, a gift from his father on his 30th birthday, was the first to go. Then the fleet of cars, then the art collection, each piece a monument to a deal he had closed, now just numbers on an auction house ledger. The final, most symbolic defeat was leaving the penthouse. He packed a single suitcase, the rest of his bespoke suits and designer possessions to be handled by a service. As he stood in the foyer for the last time, he looked at the polished mahogany table where Isabella had left her key. The space felt haunted by her absence, by the ghost of the life he had so carelessly demolished. He moved into a soulless, beige-walled corporate apartment in a less fashionable part of town. His view was no longer the emerald expanse of Central Park, but a brick wall and the fire escape of the neighboring building. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant wail of sirens. Sounds he'd been insulated from for years. In this self-imposed exile, stripped of the armor of wealth and the distraction of work, Marcus was left with nothing but the company of the man in the mirror. For the first time, he was forced to truly look at him. He saw the arrogance, the hollowness, the profound selfishness. He saw his father's reflection, staring back, a man who believed emotion was a rounding error in the calculus of success. His first instinct, a muscle memory from a lifetime of transactions, was to try and fix his marriage with money. He instructed his lawyers to draft a divorce settlement for Isabella that was breathtaking in its scope. It included the full unencumbered title to the penthouse, a stock portfolio worth tens of millions, and a perpetual alimony payment that would ensure she and the child would live in extravagant comfort for the rest of their lives. It was a king's ransom, a final grand gesture from a deposed king. The rejection was swift and brutal. Isabella's lawyer, a calm, silver-haired man named Robert Davies, called him directly bypassing his legal team. His tone was not unkind, but it was as unyielding as granite. "Mr. Thorne." Davies said, his voice a quiet rumble over the phone. "I am in receipt of your proposed settlement. My client, Mrs. Thorne, has instructed me to respectfully decline in its entirety." Marcus was stunned into silence. Decline? It's more than generous. It secures her future. "Mr. Thorne," Davies continued patiently, "my client is quite capable of securing her own future. You may not be aware, but her business, Atelier Rossi, is a remarkable success. She is financially independent. She does not want your money. She feels it would be tainted. Tainted." The word struck Marcus with physical force. "What she does want," Davies concluded, his voice leaving no room for negotiation, "is your signature on the divorce papers which we will be sending over tomorrow. She wishes to move forward with her life unencumbered. She suggests respectfully that you do the same." The call ended. Marcus sat in the sterile apartment, the phone still in his hand, and understood. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an amputation. She was cutting him out of her life, and his money, the only tool he had ever known, was useless. It couldn't fix this. That profound failure became the unlikely catalyst for change. If he couldn't buy his way back, what was left? The question led him to a bookstore where he felt deeply out of place. He bought a copy of What to Expect When You're Expecting the same book he'd seen on her nightstand. He went home and began to read. He read about morning sickness, about hormonal shifts, about the development of the fetal heart, lungs, and brain. He read about the immense physical and emotional burden placed upon the mother. Each page was a revelation illuminating the secret world Isabella had inhabited alone. He felt a profound, sickening shame for his ignorance, for his complete lack of curiosity about the miracle occurring within his own home, his own wife. His next step was even harder. He found a therapist, a doctor, Anya Sharma, whose profile said she specialized in narcissistic personality traits and professional burnout. The first session was a disaster. Marcus tried to control the narrative, to present his situation as a series of unfortunate business setbacks. Dr. Sharma, a sharp, empathetic woman with eyes that missed nothing, gently dismantled his defenses. "You talk about the Ethelred deal and your divorce as if they are parallel events, Marcus," she said in their second session. "But they are not. They are the same story. You treated your wife like a hostile takeover. You acquired her, assumed her loyalty, and then neglected the asset until it collapsed. The only difference is Isabella had the strength to divest herself from you first." The truth of her words was so stark, so undeniable, that he had no response. He began to talk, really talk. He spoke of his father, a man who would test him on stock prices at the dinner table, but had never once asked him how he felt. He recalled a specific memory at age 12. He had cried after losing a championship baseball game. His father had taken him aside, not to comfort him, but to lecture him. "Tears are a liability, Marcus," his father had said, his voice cold. "They broadcast weakness. Liquidate that emotion, now." Marcus had learned to compartmentalize, to numb, to equate feeling with failure. Dr. Sharma helped him see that this emotional liquidation had come at an unbearable cost, his own humanity. Meanwhile, Isabella was not just surviving, she was incandescent. The feature in Vogue, titled "The Soul of Soho Atelier Rossi and the Return of True Craft," had turned her boutique from a local secret into an international destination. Tourists and fashion editors alike made pilgrimages to the store. The Fiorenza tote the bag that had served as the catalyst for the implosion of her marriage, now had a 9-month waiting list. She was powerful, respected, and serene. The pregnancy, free from the toxic stress of her marriage, was progressing beautifully. She felt the baby kick and would smile a secret, shared joy. She was building her legacy, and she was doing it alone. Yet a shadow of sadness sometimes touched her. She would hear whispers from mutual acquaintances about Marcus's spectacular fall from grace. She felt a detached pity the way one might feel about a historical figure who had met a tragic end. She discussed it with Sophia one evening while they were closing the shop. Heard Thorne sold his last piece of art. Sophia said, her tone neutral. A Basquiat. Oh, Isabella said, pausing from folding a cashmere blanket from her new Bambino line. You know. Sophia continued, watching her friend carefully. For a guy who was such a monster, he's taking his punishment quietly. Isabella knew what she meant. There had been no angry phone calls, no legal threats, no attempts to sir her. Only a deafening silence. It was unnerving. The silence was broken one rainy Tuesday, 7 months into her pregnancy. A sudden searing pain shot through her abdomen, so intense it made her cry out. A terrified Sophia bundled her into a cab and rushed her to Lenox Hill Hospital. The diagnosis was thankfully not dire preterm labor contractions, brought on by dehydration and exhaustion, a warning from her body to slow down. But her OB-GYN Dr. Miller, a woman who left nothing to chance, insisted on keeping her overnight for monitoring. A nurse checking her intake forms said briskly, "We've contacted your emergency contactor, Mr. Marcus Thorne." Isabella's heart sank. Oh, I meant to change that. He's on his way, the nurse said, oblivious. Marcus was in his lawyer's office, staring at the final grim figures of his financial ruin, when his phone buzzed. He saw the hospital's number, and his blood ran cold. The nurse's words were a staccato burst of terror. "Your wife, Mrs. Thorne, complication with the pregnancy." The world narrowed to a single point of focus, Isabella. He bolted from the meeting, leaving his lawyers staring in astonishment. He ran out into the torrential rain, not even registering he was getting soaked, his mind a frantic repeating prayer. "Please let her be okay. Please let them be okay." He hailed a cab, his voice cracking as he gave the hospital's address. The ride was torture. Every red light, every traffic jam, was a physical torment. This fear was different from the fear of losing a deal. It was primal, absolute. It was the fear of losing a part of himself he hadn't even known he valued. He arrived at her floor, dripping and breathless. He found her room and hesitated, his hand hovering over the door handle. What right did he have to be here? He was a source of her pain, not her comfort. But the terror for her, for their child, was a force that propelled him forward. He pushed the door open. She was in the bed, looking small and pale against the white sheets, an IV line taped to her arm. She looked up, and her eyes, though wary, held no malice, only a deep, profound exhaustion. "They called you," she stated, her voice a quiet rasp. "Yes." He managed his own voice, hoarse. He stayed by the door, a pathetic, dripping figure. Is the baby? Are you both okay?" The raw, undisguised fear in his eyes was something she had never witnessed. It wasn't the irritation of an interrupted executive. It was the elemental terror of a husband and a father. "We're fine," she said, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. "It was a scare. The doctor just wants me to rest. You didn't have to come." Yes, he said, taking a single tentative step into the room. I did. He stayed for over an hour. He didn't offer platitudes or make excuses. He just sat in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, a silent, watchful presence. When Dr. Miller came in, he stood up respectfully and listened intently. He asked quiet, relevant questions. What is her blood pressure now? What was the frequency of the contractions? Is the fetal heart rate stable? He was using the vocabulary he'd learned from the book, demonstrating a knowledge that stunned her. He wasn't performing. He was participating. When it was time for him to go, he stood at the door, his frame silhouetted against the hallway light. Isabella, he said, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. I know I have no rights here, but I am going to fight for you. Not with lawyers, not with money. I am going to fight to become a man that you and our child can at least respect. A man who deserves to be in our child's life. I will spend whatever time I have left trying to earn that. He left before she could formulate a response, leaving a profound silence in his wake. That night, lying in the quiet hospital room, Isabella felt the first tiny crack in the wall she had built around her heart. Marcus was true to his word. His fight was a quiet siege. He began sending a single email every morning. No pleas, no apologies, just information. Subject: thinking of you both. Body read today that the baby's hearing is fully developed now. The book suggests reading aloud. I know it's silly, but I read the business section to him this morning. Thought he should be prepared. It was a small, consistent gesture of presence, a thread spun across the chasm between them. He took the last of his liquidated funds and, through his financial advisor, made a substantial and completely anonymous donation to a non-profit that provided seed capital to businesses started by single mothers. He sent a copy of the blind trust receipt to Mr. Davies with a simple, handwritten note. This is not for her. It is because of her, Mr. Davies, a man not easily impressed, forwarded it to Isabella without comment. The divorce papers remained on her desk unsigned. 2 weeks before her due date, he appeared at Atelier Rossi, just as Sophia was locking the door for the night. He was thinner, and there were lines of exhaustion around his eyes, but he stood straighter with a humility that was entirely new. He was holding a large, flat, rectangular object wrapped in simple brown paper. I know I am not welcome here. He began, his voice low. But I had to bring this myself. It's an apology. The only kind I know how to make now. He carefully unwrapped the object. It was a sign carved from a single beautiful piece of aged olive wood. In elegant, slightly imperfect script, it read, Atelier Rossi, founded by Isabella Rossi, Florence and New York. In the corner was a small, intricately carved needle and thread, her family crest. Isabella stared, her breath catching in her throat. The carving was clearly not the work of a professional. It was the work of someone who had poured hours of frustrating, painstaking effort into it. It was the work of human hands. Before he became who he was, Marcus said, his gaze fixed on the sign. My father liked to work with wood. It was the only time I ever saw him smile. I found his old tools in a storage unit. I wanted to try and build something. For you. For the store. He finally looked up at her, and his eyes were full of a vulnerability she had never seen. You come from builders, Izzy. All I ever did was take things apart. This is my first attempt at putting something together. Tears she hadn't realized she was holding back began to stream down Isabella's face. Sophia, seeing the profound intimacy of the moment, gave Isabella's arm a gentle squeeze and disappeared into the stockroom, giving them their space. "Why, Marcus?" Isabella whispered through her tears. "Why all this? Why now?" "Because I lost everything," he said, his voice raw and honest. "And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It burned away everything that wasn't real. The money, the power, the reputation, it was all smoke. The only thing of value in my entire life was you. It was always you. I was just too blind, too broken and too arrogant to see it." He didn't move closer. He didn't press his case. He just stood there, offering this humble, handcrafted piece of himself, a penance made of wood and effort. Isabella reached out a trembling hand and traced the letters of her name. She thought of her nonno Antonio in his dusty workshop in Florence, the scent of wood shavings and leather in the air. He had taught her about the dignity of creation. And now here was Marcus, the man of demolition, offering her a creation of his own. The chasm between them had not vanished. The years of pain and neglect could not be erased by a single gesture. But the sign was not a bridge across the chasm. It was a foundation stone laid carefully at the edge, a place from which perhaps a bridge could one day be built. Looking at the man before her, no longer a king, no longer a tycoon, but simply a man holding a piece of wood. Isabella felt not the resolution of their story, but the quiet, terrifying and hopeful possibility of a new one. The reconstruction had begun. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a millionaire and a clerk. It was a story about being seen. Marcus Thorne had to lose his entire world to finally open his eyes to the woman who was his world all along. Isabella Rossi had to build her own kingdom to escape her gilded cage and rediscover her own worth. Their story reminds us that true value isn't found in a bank account or a brand name, but in respect, in partnership, and in the quiet, consistent work of showing up for the people we love. It's a powerful lesson that sometimes we have to be completely broken down before we can be rebuilt into someone stronger.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.